Hey, it's Ty, the dog trainer here with dogbehaviouronline.com and communic9.net. Now, you may be interested in what you're looking at here. I'm bringing these two guys here to you today to illustrate something that I wanted to share with you based on a few conversations I've had with some folks that have come to our website, dogbehaviouronline.com, here recently. They came with very similar problems. We ended up doing some Skype training. If you're not familiar with what our Skype training is, I'll put a link near the video here where you can check that out. It's where our people can work with us from all over the world, actually. But we ended up working with these folks with Skype simply because they weren't getting the results with trainers that they were using here locally. So let me tell you kind of the backstory, because they're two very similar stories with just a little bit of difference in how the trainers approached it. So both of these folks had a dog, and these dogs were aggressive. Oh, let's get the dog on the proper heel position on the left side. There we go. Both of these folks had a dog that was aggressive when they were on walks. Now, the trainers had the owners do two separate things. These were dog owners in completely different parts of the country, so these aren't related. It's just they had similar problems, and they had two different responses from their trainers. One of the trainers said, okay, when your dog's aggressive and barking and acting crazy, I want you to just keep walking and go past the other dog. These were both dog-aggressive dogs. So maybe there's another dog over here. I want you to just walk the other way and not give the dog any attention. And the rationale here was that if you do this, the dog doesn't get any satisfaction, doesn't get any attention, and realizes, hey, I need to stop doing that. The other trainer said something kind of similar, said, hey, when your dog starts acting that way, or a little bit before your dog starts acting that way, just give it treats. And so just start, throwing some hot dogs in that dog's mouth. The idea here is that if you do that enough, the dog will get distracted, and the dog will start to realize, hey, I see other dogs, and it's good because there's treats. Now, the problem that we had, the problem that they had, rather, with both of these methods is that the one that was told to just simply ignore it, the dog got plenty of satisfaction from the aggression. Because the dog's whole purpose in being aggressive was the dog was fearful, and so now the dog gets walked away from the source of its fear and feels better. And so in a sense, the dog was actually getting rewarded for the bad behavior. The dog was flipping out, the owner was ignoring the behavior, ignoring the dog, and just walking away, and the dog realizes, whew, that worked. Boy, I need to do that every time this happens. Every time I see a dog, I need to just flip out, because then the owner walks me away and I feel comfortable. So obviously it wasn't working. This is a very common type plan that a lot of dog trainers use, believe it or not. It doesn't generally work, yet it's quite a common method. The other common method, like I say, is what the other trainer is doing, which was throwing some treats in Doggy's mouth when this dog wanted to lunge and attack this dog. Now, that also didn't work, because guess what? The dog cared about being aggressive more than he cared about the treats. And so their trainer's response was, oh, just start it at a threshold further away. So when the dog's acting, do it further and we'll gradually get the dog closer. The problem was the intensity of this dog here was such that it didn't matter how far, they just kept going and going and going. Now, maybe if they had kept going for months and months and months and months and months and months and months, they could have eventually got to the point where they were closer. This method can kind of work, but if it's going to work, and it doesn't always, but if it is, it generally takes a lot of time, and your dog ends up getting very fat because he gets a billion treats in the process. Both of these methods are incredibly common, the treat method being more common amongst today's trainers. Today's trainers, that use treats and clickers primarily for training. And I'm not against treats and I'm not against clickers, in the sense that these are fine tools, but if they're the only tools that you're using, then you're in trouble. So I suggested to both these folks that we need to correct your dog when the dog is doing something wrong. Now, both of them said, whoa, 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 whoa. Our trainers told us that if we correct the dog, it will actually make our dog's aggression worse. This is a line that I hear from a lot of dog trainers nowadays. When your dog's being aggressive, if you correct it, it will actually make the dog worse. The dog will become more aggressive. So I'm coming here today to kind of debunk that. Is it true? Actually, it can be true, and I'll explain how in a second. But if the correction is done properly, we can actually see how the aggression we can wipe out the aggression with proper correction. And so they were trying to explain to me what their trainer said, that, oh, the dog's in this state of mind and he's being aggressive and now he gets corrected and it's going to make the aggression worse. I kind of put things on a spectrum for him. I said, okay, on one end, on one polar opposite here, we've got what you're doing, which is zero correction and either treats or ignoring, and these are two different conversations, but zero correction, we're either using treats or we're ignoring it. You know, that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, let's say, you know, the dog starts acting aggressive and you beat him on the head with a frying pan. Now, let me add a disclaimer here. I'm not recommending that. I was just giving them the two ends of the spectrum. Let's say you know this dog starts trying to attack this dog, and we pull out the old frying pan, or in this case, candy canes, and you know just go to town on the dog. How often do you think the dog is going to be aggressive in that context if he gets beat on the head with a frying pan or candy canes if he does it? Well, I can tell you, most dogs are pretty smart. They're not going to be aggressive for very long. And so the notion that you can't use correction because it's not going to work is wrong. Simply, you know, put it that way, it's wrong. Now, again, I'm not going to advocate doing that by any means. That's an awful idea. Don't ever do that. Don't even think about doing that. But I'm just simply bringing it out there to show the two polar opposites. On one end, we use treats. On the other end, just overwhelming force. Force can work. The problem is when we use that kind of force, we get some awful, awful, awful side effects. We have dogs that are fearful. We have dogs that are nervous. We have dogs that, we've got dogs that aren't being obedient for the right reasons. They're being obedient because they're terrified. And so, obviously, that's not going to work for what we're looking for. Would it work in theory to get the dog to stop being aggressive? Sure, but it's just an awful way to do it. And so I helped them see, okay, we've got one end of the spectrum, we've got treats over here, we've got pure awful force over here. We know that both of them aren't really going to work to the way that we want, so the answer has to be somewhere in the middle, right? And in explaining it like that, yeah, I guess that makes sense, the answer has to be in the middle. And so what I advocated to them is correction that makes sense to the dog. So let me go through what often happens and where the mistake happens. So the owner's walking the dog. This is just a typical owner trying to correct their dog's aggression. They're walking down the street. The dog starts lunging and trying to get to this friendly little dude over here, and the owner tugs on the leash, and the owner screams and maybe swats at the dog a little bit. You've seen it. You've seen it on the streets. Maybe you've even done this. And so, in any words, the owner's getting angry at the dog in some way or another. What's the dog experiencing? In this scenario, the dog is experiencing he's laser focused on this dog, right? He wants to go get this dog. He wants to bite him. He wants to attack him. He wants to bark at him. He wants to, whatever it is, he wants to do something that's not friendly towards this guy. And here's the owner yanking on his leash or whatever, yelling at him, swatting at him. All of the correction coming from here, the dog is very likely to associate with this guy. The dogs, because the dog is laser focused, the dogs tend to form associations based on what they're looking at in that moment. And so here he is looking at this dog, and he's getting corrected from this owner, and he's like, every time I see dogs I get corrected, I really hate other dogs. And so, like I mentioned earlier, you can make aggression worse with corrections for aggression. So what we've developed is a couple techniques. One of them is with a leash, and one of them is with an e-collar. With the leash, what we do is we like to correct in the opposite direction. So as the dog starts to be aggressive, he's thinking about it. We call it the aggression snowball. So that moment when he's starting to think about it, and you know what I'm talking about, the ears go up or the fur goes up. Every dog's different, but if you are dealing with a situation like this, excuse me, you know what I'm talking about. And so as the dog starts that snowball, we immediately do an about face. And with the leash, we give a correction. Nope, nope, nope. And we just give a few corrections. These don't have to be overwhelmingly hard. These are just firm but fair corrections as we go this way, and we move that direction. It might be one correction, it might be 7. What we're looking for is for the dog to change his state of mind. Now, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn back around. We're going to go towards the other dog again. If he flips out, nope, nope, nope. A couple corrections going the opposite direction. Now what happens here, and why this can be so effective, is because the second the dog's mind is going into that state of mind, which we know we don't like, we can immediately change it by corrections in the opposite direction. So we're attaching a negative because the correction is obviously negative, but we're attaching it to the behavior because the dog is starting the behavior, and then we suddenly change the dog's state of mind, and we're going the opposite direction with correction. So the dog is able in that situation to associate the correction with his behavior, with his state of mind, rather than with the other dog. And so instead of him thinking the other dog is the cause of my corrections, he starts to think, okay, every time I go into this state of mind, it leads to a correction, because we very quickly pull him into another state of mind because we very quickly get him looking the opposite direction. The other method we use is one we call the step back recall with the e-collar, to where the dog starts, his aggression snowball, we step back and we call the dog to us. He needs to turn around and come back. But essentially what we're doing with using corrections is we're teaching the dog how to slow his thought process down and actually think. And what we're doing is we're saying, okay, every time you start thinking about being aggressive towards that other dog, I'm going to get your attention back on me. Now at that point you could, if the attention comes back on you, you could add a treat. And this is where, like I say, treats can be fine, but treats by themselves generally are pretty impotent. They generally don't get the job done in an aggressive scenario. But, let's say we use a proper correction that's firm but fair, that gets the dog focused on us, and then we add a treat. Then that's a treat that's coming from this state of mind that's good. I hate seeing these videos of trainers that, the dog's freaking out and they're throwing treats at him. Because the dog's being rewarded for the entirely wrong behavior there, obviously. And so we want the dog to be in the right state of mind before he gets any sort of reward or praise or treat or whatever the case might be. So, like I say, can you correct a dog when they're acting aggressively? Yes. But you need to correct it in such a way that the focus gets immediately onto you, the owner, and away from the other dog, and so that your dog can become conditioned to think about you when the dog is stressed. Because that's the most important thing, right? This guy's stress is leading to his aggression. And so if he's going to be stressed, I want him to think about you rather than about him. Because if he's thinking about him, we know we've got a problem. We've got, dog fights, and we've got liability, and we've got lawsuits and all sorts of stuff. But if your dog is nervous and he starts thinking about you, and he starts to realize, hey, nothing bad ever happens from the other dog, we just pass him on the street, then we start to see real behavioral change happen. And what some would call rehabilitation, to where the dog starts to realize, okay, I don't even have to go into that aggression snowball. I don't even have to enter that state of mind, because I can think about my owner. My owner's a good, solid leader. Owner takes care of me. Here we go, walking past the other dog. So I encourage you to think about that as you're dealing with a dog with some sort of aggression issues. The same can be said for dogs that are like, every now and then we'll work with a dog that is so overly hyper and excited. Like they're walking along, this dog sees that dog, and he doesn't want to attack. He is just so flipping excited. He's, doing cartwheels and stuff. And oftentimes these types of dogs, they're screaming, because they're like, let me get over there. They want to play, or they want to interact. We can do the exact same type of thing for that type of dog too. So hopefully these visuals made sense. Happy training. Time for you to get to work with your dogs.